Before we start, I would just like to quickly ask that you drop a like. It would really help the video and it helps the channel, so I appreciate it. But let's talk about Trae Young. Trae has opened the year pretty damn well, but I will say that it is not as big of a deal as I think people are making it out to be. To open the year, he's putting up 25 points a game, 8 assists, 1.5 steals, shooting 48% from the field, 39% from 3 on 8 attempts, and 82% from the free throw line. And when I say it's not that big of a deal, it's just because this is what Trae was doing to close out the end of his rookie season. I was kind of concerned that maybe this would happen, and his shooting percentages have been better than I think they would normally be, but he was doing this to close out the year. I don't even really think that's that big of a sign of huge improvement. I think he's just continuing what he was doing. And don't get me wrong, what he was doing was amazing, so good on him for continuing it. The 39% on 8 attempts is very promising that he really can be the shooter on paper that he appears to be from watching him. The Hawks are 3-5. One of those losses was without Trae Young, and he also hasn't had John Collins for the last 2 games. One of those games being where Trae only had 9 assists versus my Bulls. I really appreciate him for only having one bad game this year versus my team. We really needed that one. John Collins being out has made it to where Jabari Parker is their second leading scorer, and that has made it harder for Trae to get his shot because he's really the only one that you have to worry about offensively, especially with some of the guys around him not hitting their shots to open the year. When you look at what Trae has done so far, the fact that the Hawks would pretty much be 500 without his injury or Collins being out, that shows that his play is really translating to wins. Of course, for the second half of the season with the Hawks last year, his play was translating to wins again there, and that's why the Hawks didn't actually have a high draft spot. I believe they were slotted in at 8 and dropped down to 10, or that might have been the Mavericks pick now that I think about it. I think Trae Young has shown that he is ready to translate to wins now, and I think he's showing that he's with Luka Doncic in that regard, where he is gonna have an amazing sophomore year and it's gonna start translating to wins sooner rather than later. I had a conversation on the Hoops Cast along with Mojo with Emio, the NBA storyteller, and he brought up a pretty good point that most really superstar players pretty much hop onto the scene pretty early. There's not a whole lot of years of, well, he's only 19, no shots at Jason Tatum, but generally speaking, the top players in the NBA now were there pretty much immediately. Like, Steph Curry and Kawhi Leonard are really the only examples. James Harden was pretty much just held back by the system he was in. As soon as he went to Houston, he was putting up all-star numbers. But if that is kind of the case, which that's a whole nother topic that we won't get into, but if that is kind of the case, I do think Trae is fitting into that category where he's coming onto the scenes pretty damn fast. But speaking of John Collins and the guys around him, I want to talk about them and what they could mean for Trae's future. I think John Collins can be the 3rd best player on a championship team, maybe 2nd. There's been some comparisons with this team with Nash and Amari Stoudemire. I do think Collins can be Amari Stoudemire-esque offensively, while also developing his 3-point shot, which has looked pretty good to open the year. Also, he's been blocking some shots to open the year. Hopefully that translates to him actually becoming a good defensive player, because if John Collins is a good defensive player, that would mean a whole lot for the Atlanta Hawks. As I said, his jump shot has been developing. I just don't think he's ever going to be a great shooter from out there. I think he can become a respectable one that you just can't leave wide open, but never quite great. And even if he does become a good shooter, he's always going to be an inside the paint guy, regardless of if he became, one of the best stretch 4s in the league. The fact that he is primarily an inside player could be a problem. Down the line, whatever center that they end up with is going to need to be a primarily perimeter-oriented center just to make up for that. But it's kind of hard to find guys who can both play interior defense, rebound, and shoot threes. Most big men who shoot 3-pointers are not really also dominant in the paint defensively, but that's a whole nother conversation, I guess. But the other prospects around Trae, there is Cameron Reddish, He has sucked so far to open the year. We were discussing this on the podcast, me and Mojo. He's a Hawks fan, if you did not know. Yeah, it's mostly a confidence thing for Reddish. He has the size, he has the fluidity and the smoothness as a scorer and just a player in general to suggest that he can be a pretty damn solid basketball player at the very least. He just really needs to be confident, and right now he is not confident. But in terms of how good do I think he can be, I really do think the sky is a limit with Reddish, but I definitely don't think he's hitting that limit by any means. If I had to make a prediction, unfortunately, I'd say he ends up being like a solid 16, 17 point scorer. Plays some good defense, can create in the ISO every once in a while, hit some three-pointers, finish on the fast break, that type of thing. Maybe like a more offensively minded Jaylen Brown, if that makes any kind of sense. DeAndre Hunter, on the other hand, I actually have a lot of confidence in. He has also struggled to open the year, but I don't think it's as big of a deal. I really think with Reddish, when you watch him play, it's the fact that he is just uncomfortable and not confident. Hunter is very, very composed. He just has not been hitting a shot so far, and I don't think that's a sign of him being anything to worry about. I really just think he's struggled so far, and it's not a big deal. But he is very much composed. Like I said, when he's playing, he looks like a veteran out there. He is very matter of fact with the moves that he makes, does not make a whole lot of mistakes. He can take a pump fake on the three-point line, take 2 steps and do a pull-up jumper, like just with the utmost confidence. Confidence is not a problem for him, and then he also has the size to play a small ball 4 at times, primarily a 2 or 3 for him though. He looks like he can be a good shooter, and he also looks like he can be a great defensive player. So I do think he will be a great fit for them in the long term. Kevin Huerter's been off to a rough start, or Red Velvet as we should all call him, because that is a great nickname. Shooting 33% from 3. I think some Hawks fans have overrated his potential. I think JJ Redick is pretty much the cap on him, but not quite the three-point shooter, but more of a creator and athlete than Redick is. I'm just talking about their peaks, not necessarily their play styles. But yeah, I do think he can be a starting caliber player, but he might end up being a bench player depending on what Reddish ends up being. Although, I don't know, Reddish is a tough one to put a finger on, so there's a chance that Huerter ends up being better. But another young guy in this team that's been interesting to open the year, I mentioned him earlier. Jabari Parker is second on this team in scoring with 16 points a game on some really good shooting splits outside of his three-point percentage. So, yeah, here's the thing with Jabari Parker. When he was on the Bulls, he was horrible, but I also think that was because the Bulls were just not a good fit for him. Like, he had to play small forward on this team, and Jabari Parker is a power forward in the modern NBA, without a doubt. And on this team, next to Lauri Markkanen, next to Wendell Carter, he just was not comfortable going up against small forwards, and because of that, he was, going up against guys who could keep up with him. A lot of it was him being able to beat bigger, slower power forwards off of the dribble. Was not able to do that against threes, so his offense wasn't even necessarily worth it. And then defensively, and this has not improved on the Hawks, he was horrible, and he still is horrible, but I do think that can be made up for the fact of him being a good scorer. As of right now, he is starting at the 4, but down the line, I do think there is a world where Jabari Parker is a really solid 6-man for the Hawks. Like, I'm talking like 5 years down the line, because he can score the ball at a solid rate. Like, I think he could be like a Spencer Dinwiddie of power forwards without any kind of defense at all. But yeah, so I think he could be a part of that future. But back to Trae Young and his ceiling, which is what this video is about, but I wanted to talk about his team a bit. I think offensively, he can be like Steph Curry minus the ridiculous off-ball movement of Steph, which is quite ridiculous, as well as the level and high percentages of Steph Curry. Like, I don't think he's going to have a season averaging 30 points on 50% shooting. Like, that is fucking insane. I still can't believe Steph did that. And I don't think he's going to be that level of automatic shooter where like every time he shoots it, you feel like it's going in. Even though Trae has moments where he's like that, I feel like that with Steph. Like if Steph is 0 for 15 from 3, I'm still feeling like he's going to nail whatever 3-pointer he takes. And then with Steph, with that kind of Steph level shooting, not quite, I think he can be the second best shooter ever down the line, just not quite past Steph. And then I think he also has a like ridiculous vision. Like Trae Young is already probably in the top 5 in terms of passing vision in the game. Like he's averaging, 8 assists a game this year. I do think he could be a 12 assists per game guy. However, I think what we're learning recently in MEO, the NBA Storyteller again, made a whole story on basically this concept. But actually having a point guard who averages double-digit assists is really not good for your team because it's usually a sign of poor assist distribution, and it's important to have a lot of guys that can play make on your team and not just one leading the charge. But I do believe that Trae has that level of talent, just hopefully he's not actually averaging that because it could be detrimental to his own team. In terms of Trae unlocking just being a ridiculous basketball player would be for him to develop that off-ball game, because the one real criticism of his game right now is that he's not a great off-ball player. Despite his three-point shooting, he's not really great with running around screens and trying to create space without the ball in his hand. And as a result, that's why I don't think his three-point percentage will ever be what Steph's is. Like, in Steph's 2016 season, he shot 44% from 3 on, like, 10 attempts a game. That is insane, and a lot of that comes from the fact that he was such an elite off-ball player that he could find himself easier looks. Like, most of the three-pointers that Trae is taking are off of the dribble. Whereas when you look at Stephen Curry, it is in the 60s to even last year in the 70s. So that is a clear indicator that off-ball movement is a big improvement to your three-point percentage, so I think that would make Trae a significantly better player. But like I said, I think Steph, minus that off-ball movement and not quite the shooter, with Steve Nash's vision, that is a hell of a point guard in the NBA. Obviously not a defensive player, but really at that point, who even gives a shit? But I do think he can be the best player on a championship team. I think he can be even a top 5 player in the league, maybe even top 3. So what does this mean for the Hawks? Well, they have a hell of a player. Can this roster as it is right now become a championship team? I think it needs work, and I think you need another scoring player as well as some more defense on this team. So I think like a 2 guard that can like get you 20 plus points per game. John Collins as your 3rd guy, getting scoring at the power forward position. Get DeAndre Hunter as your small forward, being a next level 3-and-D guy, being a Robert Covington type of player, as well as some center down the line who is a stretch 5 with some good interior defense and rebounding. And I definitely think that can become a championship team 5 years down the line. Trae is definitely that dude, and I'm excited to see where his career goes. What's funny enough is with him and Luka, those were the 2 guys in the draft that I said would be busts, and they are now 2 of my favorite players in the game. I'm very happy to have been wrong about those guys, but that's my opinion on Trae Young's ceiling. I don't think I'm speaking with too much hyperbole. I just think he really is that crazy. So let me know what you think his ceiling is, and like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.